There's a reason that I'm called Simon Scrapes, and that's because before I got introduced to N8N, I was super interested and dug really deep into scraping information from lots of different websites. So I'm really excited to share this video where we'll go over all the different methods that I know about that you can use inside N8N. And we'll talk about the complexities of web scraping and when to use each method. And we're not just going to use the bog standard scraping methods of using GET requests from a HTTP request, but we will cover that as well. But we'll talk about why that's not useful in most cases. And we'll also talk about how to find out which scraping method is best for your use case. And it will all be done through N8N. So all very no code, low code. So let's jump straight into the first section, which is all about finding the right places to scrape. So it's important to start with some basic concepts around scraping. So let's start by talking about finding the right places to scrape and what are called sitemaps. So we're going to use the example here of N8N's template library. So if we go to n8n.io, and I believe it's workflows, we can effectively see all of the different templates that have been published. So 2,309 workflow automation templates. Now, we have a couple of options to scrape this information. Let's just click on AI. So we've got 1,002 results for AI. And if you were doing traditional scraping, and this is the method you've probably seen yourself, you can actually Command Option and J to open up your command console inside the browser. I don't actually know what this is called, but what you can effectively see, if we go to elements here, the website is made up of this HTML, and that just says where everything sits on the page. So if we scroll through somewhere in here, we'd be able to search, and we might even be able to filter for all of the different elements on this page. So I could right click this, for example, and then go to inspect, and that would point me to the HTML or CSS tag that is that element on the page. So if you were doing traditional web scraping, you would effectively try to pull all of this HTML and find the relevant CSS tag or CSS selector to pull that information from this website. So if this is sounding too complex, bear with me because it gets significantly easier. So websites want to be crawled or searched like this. And the reason they want to be searched like this is because to get their site pages indexed and rank high on search engines like Google, they need to publicly put the information out there so that Google can go and index those pages. Google can go and crawl that information from these pages. So websites are generally set up, in most cases, we'll talk about the ones that aren't, so that information is displayed on the front end, but also appears on the HTML. Google will generally go and crawl pages based on what's called a sitemap, which is effectively a layout of the different sites. So for most sites, you could probably just Google this, right? So N8N workflows sitemap. So the sitemap will effectively, and there'll be a .xml file usually or link. And if we click on that, it's effectively a page that shows us all of the relevant N8N workflow pages. So inside n8n.io, it's basically got the structure of all the sub pages inside it. And Google uses this to basically go to each of these pages, index those pages, but also inside those pages, it will link to those relevant pages. So we can crawl information from there. So you can see that if we go to n8n.io/sitemap-workflows.xml, for example, we have a full list of 2,309 URLs, which corresponds naturally to the 2,309 workflow automation templates. So immediately, if we wanted to scrape these templates and information from these templates from the sitemap for this page, we can effectively just gather and crawl that information. So for example, if I was to go back to N8N in here, and I wanted to pull the information from the sitemap, then I just use the traditional scraping method, which is get in a HTTP request, and I just effectively pull from that website. So the sitemap URLs, let's unpin this data. We don't need any authentication here. We're literally just pulling the HTML, or in this case, XML from that website. So you can see it comes back with a load of data here. And it's not very legible, but you can see inside here that we're effectively pulling different links. So if I go to one of these as an example and open it up, you'll see that actually this is going to be a template. So it's basically gone to the workflows XML. Let me go back to it and pulled all of these links. So it's given us a list of the things that we potentially want to scrape. So this is potentially a list that we then want to go into each of these links and scrape individual data from. So often sites will have these sitemaps because, like I said, they want to be crawled by Google. So this is a really good way to find out first the right pages that you want to scrape. When it comes to actually scraping them then, there's a couple of different methods which we'll run over in a second. But let's first talk about, we've now crawled all the different URLs. So we've got a big lot of data, which is actually in XML format. And you'll often see this in either XML format or HTML format. If we scrape to sitemap, it's almost always in .xml format. So we can use this inbuilt node, which is XML. And all we're going to do is say, convert XML to JSON. And we're doing that because we know that JSON is the easiest way to manipulate the data inside N8N. So if we can convert the data we've got into JSON, it's going to make it a hell of a lot easier for us to manipulate. So we're going to input in the property name, which as standard is data. And what that's going to output is basically a list of all the different URLs. Look, so it's got some standard website header stuff here, but then underneath we've got every single URL. So we've got a URL array that contains all of these different individual objects. And it seems like LOC is the link to the individual workflow, and it tells you also when it was last modified. So you can see we've got a massive list of all these different workflows, which will correspond to the 2,309 workflows that we saw. So all we're going to do is effectively take out and split out the URL set here, the URL set.url, and that should individually then separate the LOC and last mod, i.e. each URL. So in this case, we want to end up scraping, and it's just not working for now. Let me make sure the trigger is attached, and I'll just confirm those are all done. So that's going to run through, and you can see, oh, okay, we've not pulled 2,309. For some reason, it's pulled 1,428 from that file, but for demonstration purposes, that's absolutely fine. So you can see now we've broken out the individual objects of the links and when it was last modified. So if, for example, then we wanted to scrape the information from those individual pages, and let's demonstrate with a limited number here. Let's say we wanted to do it from 10 pages. We can put in a limit node here. And here we come to the first way in which you scrape information. Let's just do it for one actually first. So if we limit that to one, that'll just pass the first item through. So we'll have one page to scrape. And let's just bring that up. And this is the most bog standard way to scrape, which is actually using a GET request or a HTTP request with the GET method on a given URL. So we're just going to take json.lock, which we know is our URL that we want to scrape. And all we're going to do is actually scrape that. So let's see what comes back from that. And again, it's quite confusing, right? We have basically some HTML templates. So when we went onto that individual page, let's go into it here. If we opened up the terminal that we saw earlier and go to elements, we've basically got all of this information and it's all nested. You see all these different dividers and scripts. We've got all of that information that's been returned back in a data field here. So it's going to be really hard to read. And this is one of the downsides of using this method, but it does the job, right? So what we then need to do is use a thing called CSS selectors. So if we have this, if you type in HTML in the node window, we can basically work with the HTML data. And what we're trying to do here is basically say, what data do we want from this page in a consistent JSON format? So again, we're trying to get it into a usable format for us to use inside N8N. So we've got these source data here, which we'll call JSON data because it's actually coming in a JSON, but it's JSON on the outside and then HTML on the inside, if that makes sense. So it's called data. And then what we're going to do is basically extract different values from it. So if I was pulling information from here, then I would potentially want the title. And this was by Jan, the founder of N8N. I would want the description, which is very short here. And I would also want the JSON template because potentially I want to download that in the future. I probably wouldn't want any of this information. So what I'm going to do is basically look through to find the tag in the HTML. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to search for the title here. And you can see we've got insert Excel data to Postgres. Very easy to find this one. And this is a fairly simple, straightforward example. So we basically then need to work out what is the CSS selector to get that text back. And much in the same way that when we have a JSON object, everything is nested. This HTML, as you saw on the website, was completely nested. So there's what we have called classes, we have IDs, and we have various data structures in the HTML. You don't need to worry about too much about the detail because this is not the best way to scrape, but it is one way. And the CSS selectors just basically point to the right part of the HTML code to pull the right attribute out. So for example, we can name this whatever we want. We could call this data, but really what we're trying to do is extract the title here. And I know that the CSS selector here, because it's in this, I believe it's a class here, would just be title. That one's nice and easy, and that will return the title for us. But if we were to return something like description, and let's just grab the description or part of the description from here, and let's search it inside our HTML code, you can see, might have to control F that. You can see it's so far down inside this nested HTML code. And that's what makes this not the optimal way to scrape pages. Although it's possible, you'd need to find out basically the nested tag in order to work out how to get that attribute back. Now, it's absolutely possible to do that. And the way I'd usually do this is copy paste the whole lot into Perplexity or Claude. And I'd say I need to find title, which is X. I'd need to find the description, which is read XLS from file. And it would basically go and try and find the CSS selectors for me and put those in. These ones aren't even correct at the moment. You can see it's just returning title. But that's effectively what I'd do if I was using this method. But the reason this method is not the best, right, is because actually most sites, this won't work for. You can maybe grab one page using a HTTP request from most sites, but most sites are going to have some sort of blocking behavior. So when we're sending a HTTP request, the website on the other end of that request knows where the request is being sent from. So it knows that the request is coming from an automation platform and not a human browsing the website. So N8N website, absolutely fine for this because they don't have that anti-bot measures to stop you scraping the website. But as soon as you try to scrape any sort of marketplace or anything a bit more sophisticated, you're going to hit errors immediately using these GET requests. So for example, we have a bunch of people in my community here, in the Scrapes community, that have asked about scraping various websites. One of those is Dave, who's asked about scraping this winery. So Australian, I believe it's Australian wineries website, right? So inside here, there is lots of valuable information. There's the name of a different vineyard. It's got the contact details. It's got the email, the website, the Facebook, etc. So if we were to try and scrape that URL and we just take that URL, take it back to a HTTP request, and we try and execute that, you'll see it comes up with forbidden, perhaps could check your credentials. This is because actually they've deployed some anti-bot measures. So you can see in the error code here, 403 error, and let's search that. Forbidden, where the server understands a request but refuses to authorize it. So we're trying to pull information from this site here, but actually it says, no, I'm not going to give it to you because I know that you're not a human browsing this website. And websites put these in place because they don't want their data to be extracted and sold elsewhere. Their data is valuable. Having it on here is what probably makes winetitles.com money. And they're probably trying to protect the best practice or protect these wineries and vineyards, etc. So we're immediately going to get the forbidden errors using this method. And not to mention, we already saw how painful it was to extract the right CSS selectors to select the right HTML. So let's talk about other methods and how we can get around this, because often we still want to access that data, and there are ways to actually get that data. So the best way when you can't get this to work is actually a little known method. But most of the time when we're calling APIs, we're calling APIs that are publicly accessible. So when we do a HTTP request, we are calling often to an API, and it permits us to take certain data. Now, internally on websites, they also use their own APIs quite often. So we had a request in the community, and this was from Lena, and she wanted to scrape Hyperdino, which is a Spanish supermarket chain, as far as I understand. So the best way to scrape to get the most structured data is actually to go directly to the website. So let's just go to drink some water, because it's an example I've tested already. But if we open up that console again, so Command Option and J, or it might be Control Option J, we can effectively see the requests that Hyperdino is sending on their internal servers, which are just API requests. And if we can emulate being a browser, a user on a browser through N8N, then we're often able to get really valuable information very easily. So if we go to network here, for example, network tells us all the API requests that are happening. So if I click on any button here, let's click on a drink, you see more requests just came down here. Now, we won't go into the detail right now of the requests. We'll do that in a second and show you how to find them. But again, if we go to, if there's a second page, and you see as we're scrolling down the page, there's a ton of API requests. And that's because often websites are monitoring the buttons we're hovering over, the buttons we're clicking, what is loading. And as soon as you refresh or load a new screen or press page 2, you often see a new request come in. And what we can do is we can effectively see that request. If we refresh here and it clears the request, so you can also clear the requests up here, we'll effectively be able to find on some websites, not always, the request that gives us the product information or the information on the page. Because if you think about it from Hyperdino's point of view, right, they've got a website that they want to populate with product. Now, they must have a back-end database that they're pulling from in order to show that information on the front end. So what we can do is we can go through these and we can actually look inside the data, and we can see it's not going to be this one. So we've clicked inside there. And what we're looking for is clear JSON data. So we can see the headers that are sent. We can see the response. We're mainly interested in the response here. And what we're looking for are just fetch and XHR requests, which is basically where they're fetching information from their database in the backend. So we see this one down here, agua.html, p equals 3, and isScroll=1. So if we click onto that, we can actually see inside here, if I just remove the search window, that we've got some sort of product information. So we've got the name, Hyperdino Agua Mineral, Muy Debi 1 liter. So naturally, this is a Spanish website, so we might not have exactly the right translation here. But actually, inside this, which is effectively just a HTTP request or an API request to their internal system, they've got, it shows on page 3. It shows there is some sort of product code. It gives us the name of the product. It gives us the sales price, the final price here. It gives us when it was created. So we've got a lot of information around the products here. And you can see if we scroll down, we've got thousands of these. So we've got probably all of the different products in here. And what you can do is effectively go to the request over here. You can right click, and what you can do is copy. And what we're going to do is copy as a curl request. And if you've done a few HTTP requests, you're going to recognize that you can come into here and you can effectively just import a curl here. So all we're going to do is import our curl command by hitting that button, and we're going to paste exactly what we just had in there. And what that's going to do is that's going to fill out all of the different headers and the cookie value, etc., that was sent to the website that basically says it's us on our browser trying to access that page. So, i.e., we are emulating that it's us on a browser trying to access that information. But actually what we're doing is we're emulating that it's the front end web page trying to request information from their backend. So what that enables us to do, as you can see on the right, is get a really structured product data super simply, because actually we were able to find in the background this request from the fetch/XHR. And now all we need to do with that data is effectively pull the information. So we've got the different product IDs in here. And what we'd be able to do is literally just grab this info for all of the different products. So immediately it's in a ready to use format. So that's always the best way to grab information. But sadly, it's not always possible. It depends how the front end website has been built, but you'd be surprised by the number of websites that you can actually access this data. And it's usually got potentially more information than you can see on the front end because it's pulling information from the back end database. So it can be really powerful in pulling things and scraping websites. But depending on how the website is built determines whether you're able to do this method. But like I said, it is the best way because you're effectively emulating their front end or emulating a user pulling that structured data. And it's super simple, super structured once it's done. So that's by far the best way to scrape. But if it's not possible, and we'll show you an example here, there are other ways to do it. So let's go back to the winetitles.com. And if we open up the console again and we go to network, you'll see exactly why this isn't possible here. But let's refresh the page here. So if you refresh, it will effectively call all these requests again because it's pulling from the data. And we look through these. Let's go to this one here. We can see that they've sent all these headers with some sort of request here. We can see though that there's no response or a blank response. So if we try to pull this data, we're just going to get blank as well. We can see that there's some sort of framework here for an API, but it says there's been a critical error on this website, and that's not returning any useful information either. We'll have a look through all of these requests, but you can see there's basically no response data. This has failed to load response data, so let's try it. Copy as curl, and we'll go back to N8. And it's always worth trying. And what we will do is just import curl. And by the way, this, because it's emulating us, will basically have a cookie from us attached. So there are disadvantages to doing this. And one of those is that actually, if you're not limiting your number of requests per minute, then you would potentially get blocked from their website. But we'll talk about those in a second. Let's import it now. This website address suggests that it's actually a request that's sending information to Google Analytics rather than pulling information. So even if we executed this step, we're going to get no response. So this website, for example, it's just not possible to scrape it in this way. So we're going to have to resort back to general HTML. So if we go and open up the console again, we go to elements, we can see that we've again got all of this convoluted, nested information here, but we've already tried to scrape this using just a GET request, and we know that wasn't possible. So when it is not possible to use the internal APIs, i.e. the best method, and it's not possible to just use that standard way of scraping, then what we need are services with proxy rotation, or basically like anti-bot measures. We know that this website set up a method to block our request. So we either need to basically emulate a request coming from different websites that permit it, emulate a user, and we do that through what's called a proxy. So if we just go proxy definition, the authority to represent someone else, especially in voting, basically it's a server that acts as an intermediary between a user's device and the internet. So we're basically, if we use certain proxies from a proxy provider, we can basically emulate that we are a user on a browser or a user on a mobile phone trying to access that service. And because it thinks on the other side of the website that it's actually somebody on a browser or on a mobile phone, it thinks that they are a human and not a bot. So it therefore gets past some of the anti-bot measures. And again, this isn't always possible, and that's why we'll move on to the next way to scrape after this. But in some cases, and in this case, it's absolutely possible. So where the two other methods didn't work for this Australian wineries, we can use a service like Scrape Ninja. And Scrape Ninja is great because they do all the proxy rotation for us, i.e. they handle all the hard stuff for us. And they've got an inbuilt community node, which you just need to install N8N's. So if we just go to settings, we go to community nodes, and you just type in N8N nodes, Scrape Ninja in the install line here. But Scrape Ninja is effectively web scraping via an API, and it's super cheap as well. You can effectively get 100 requests for free per month, and then $25 a month is 100,000 requests. So super cheap, and will handle all the hard work for us, all those anti-bot measures. So there are ways to do it yourselves using proxy rotation, using a scraping site, but there's really no need when what you're trying to do is actually just get the data nice and easy. We'll use something like Scrape Ninja. So if we go back to the workflow, inside the Scrape Ninja community node, we can choose the different operations. So we can scrape a single page and do it fast. So this performs a raw network request, but it says in here, it basically replicates a real browser like we were talking about. Or we can scrape a single page slow, where it actually goes through, takes some screenshots on our behalf if we wanted to do that. And there's a few other options here, but what we're going to do is just try this, scrape a single page fast. And we've put in our website page here, except we've taken out the page 2 here. And what we're going to do is just execute that step, unpin the data, and that will come back now. Let's execute again. And that should come back with effectively this scraped data from the page. If we go down there, it tells us all the headers it's sent, and it will effectively be sending a cookie that emulates a real browser like we talked about. But most importantly, in the body here, we've got the HTML, which we couldn't access through a traditional request, but we still have the problem here where we effectively have to extract the right information in order to grab that information. So say, for example, in the Australian wineries here, we wanted to get the email address, which was, and you can see down the bottom there, enquiries@.com. We could effectively go into here and go Adina, search it, Adina Vineyard. Okay, that's not appearing. That's because we're on page 2. Let's go back to page 1, heroesvineyard.com. And you can see down here, we've got the tag here. So it's an ahref, so a link on the page, which is to the website, heroesvineyard.com. Let's see if we've got the email address. There is email in here somewhere. Let's go to the HTML. And you can see this is why it's better to actually get it in using the backend APIs rather than scrolling through here. But you can see that we've got various things in here that are emails. I see what's happened. So I've tried to search the email here, Heroes Vineyard, info@heroesvineyard.com. And they've actually detected that people might be doing this and put in this measure here, which is email protection, basically. So they've allowed me, because we've scraped it in a certain way, they detected that it's potentially a bot. So actually, let's do, instead of that, scrape a single page slower, and let's see if we can trick it into thinking we're a human and actually get the email back. So this is going to take a little bit longer because it's going to go slower, but actually it might defeat more of the anti-bot measures here, and we might be able to get the email back. Let's see in a second. And I've added another retry in here. We've actually tried to scrape page 3 to see if it's possible. And I had a few errors back there, which shows that when you're trying to scrape a website with anti-bot measures, you often have to retry or try another method because they are effectively trying to stop you from scraping the data. But there is most of the time a way around it. And we found in here, if I search for Ambrook Wines, which is just here, inside the email, I can see ambrokwines@gmail.com. And inside here, I can see that we have found the email mail to ambrokwines@gmail.com. So again, we still have the issue that we have to extract these using the HTML. So we still have to find the correct CSS selector for that data. So what I would do traditionally is copy paste this into an LLM and say, can you find the CSS selector for me? I'm not sure these are correct, so they might not come up. Let's execute it and see. And what I'm going to do, and you can see that when you select the right CSS selector, and I literally just got an LLM to find this for me, which was find the email addresses. It's basically returned an array because I've popped it here, and I know there's multiple email addresses under this tag inside the HTML. It's basically returned to me a list of all the different emails, and I could do this for the phone numbers, the website addresses, etc. And I've basically then got that in JSON format, nice and easy, but it's still quite painful to do that. Sometimes you might not need the data in a JSON clean format, and it might just be easier to, like, say, for example, you're passing it into an LLM. You might be able to just extract that HTML format and then actually just turn it into Markdown. So what we can do is effectively, if I disconnect this here, if I just pin this state, what we can effectively do is actually just convert that body that we received in here. If we scroll down, body, to a more readable format, which is the Markdown node. So if you type in Markdown on the nodes, it converts data between Markdown and HTML. And what we're doing is just doing HTML to Markdown. And if I scroll down, you'll see inside the data field, it's going to be quite far down because HTML takes up a lot of space. Inside the data field, it's basically converted it into a more readable format for us. So what you might want to do is just then find the tags inside here to extract the relevant information. But this is way more readable. Look, you can see all the words in here and the formatting is less verbose versus that HTML, which up here is totally unreadable because of all the tags, all of these dividers, etc. So that is a way to do that. An alternative here, right, is just using a service like Firecrawl. And Firecrawl would basically just enable us to get it into that Markdown format without taking multiple steps. So they're going to handle the scraping, but they're also going to handle getting it into a more readable format. Let's see if Firecrawl would get the same information if we put in the URL. And again, you're going to need to try multiple of these services because not everyone will be able to get past the anti-bot measures. Not all of them will work. So you need to set the Firecrawl API key. Let's see what information it returns and see if we'd get the same information. But you can see it's returned immediately as Markdown, but I can see that it has not returned all of the same information. So actually Scrape Ninja was better in this case because this has just returned generic information from that site and not all of these contact details, which is the actual valuable thing here. So if you can't scrape using the standard GET request and the internal APIs are not possible, then you need to find a service that emulates a user using a browser, i.e. emulates you going and clicking that data yourself. And you can use something like Scrape Ninja for that and then extract the content using the HTML tags. If you just want it into a clean format to put inside an LLM, for example, you don't need that JSON structure, then you can use this Markdown. But HTML tags are still a pain with this. And also sometimes these aren't good enough. And that is where we go to the final way to scrape inside N8N, which is probably the least effort method. But it's used also for sophisticated sites like LinkedIn and TikTok and big e-commerce. So naturally, the larger the company you're trying to scrape, like LinkedIn and TikTok, they don't want to give away that really valuable people information or content information to scrapers, especially a company like LinkedIn, which has people information. They don't want to give it away to scrapers. So everything is locked behind a paywall, and therefore it's significantly harder to scrape. So at this point, we don't want to go and break the law. So what we're going to do is rely on other people to take the risks on our behalf. And Appify.com, and it's not always against the law, by the way. If the information is publicly accessible, then it's absolutely fine to scrape that. There's no specific law that does not permit you scraping publicly available data because Google scrapes it every day. But you can see the first one up here, right? TikTok scraper. So you click on that on Appify, and actually what you can do is you can try it for free. And I don't have any TikTok credentials here, so I'm probably not going to be able to scrape that. But actually this one scrapes videos with a certain hashtag. And what I can do is click on JSON inside here, and we can set this up inside a HTTP request. And basically what we're doing here is Appify is a service that allows us to connect to people's scrapers that they've made on our behalf. So for things that are more complicated, they need some code set up in the background. So somebody's done the hard work here, Clockworks, created a TikTok scraper, or there's LinkedIn scrapers, etc., so that we don't have to do all that hard work and get past the anti-bot measures. And where there's services like Scrape Ninja, which can't do the job because they're more generic. So we would then rely on these Appify pre-built scrapers, or just websites that have pre-built scrapers like scrappin.io for a LinkedIn scraper, for example, where we just connect to that API directly. But Appify has hundreds and thousands of these scrapers, so we can just rely on this. And if we go to builds or integration and scroll down to use API endpoints, what we can do is run actor synchronously and get dataset items. So we're just going to copy this here. We're going to go back to our HTTP request, which is blank, and we're going to paste in that there. And that's obviously going to show you the URL, but it's also going to show you the token. So I'm going to need to remove the token after this. And if we go back to the body of the request inside the input, we click on JSON here. We can actually copy this here into the body of our request. We'll have no authentication because it's already got our token on the end here. And then sending in the body, we're going to use JSON, and we're just going to copy that in, and we will say AI automation. That's going to give us 100 results per page. And you can see we can change all these measures down here, but let's search for videos using AI automation. Let's execute that and see if it comes back with anything here. So this is one of the easiest ways to set up a scraper because we're not doing the hard work. All we're doing is connecting to effectively a pre-built scraper. So when all other measures fail, this is going to be the one to use. And if you go to Appify, there's the Appify store, there's over 4,500 different actors. So say, for example, you wanted to scrape Alibaba, which somebody wanted to in the community here, then there's lots of different Alibaba scrapers that you can connect to, and they've all got reviews and number of users as well in there. And you can see that the HTTP request has come back with all this information from these different TikToks, and it was as easy as that to scrape TikTok. And if you try to get requests directly on TikTok, then you would absolutely fail. It has too many anti-bot measures, as well as trying it through something like Scrape Ninja. It's just not specific enough to tackle those anti-bot measures for that specific request. And I thought I'd finish off, and this is actually number 5, by showing you a fun scraping bonus, which is actually a cheat for Shopify stores. And it's not available on all Shopify stores to do this, but where it is possible, this is an easy way to extract clean information about product. So let's go to a website that I know is Shopify Run. And the reason I know is because I've got an app, a Chrome extension called Wappalizer. And I can click on Wappalizer, and it's free to do this. And it tells me it's run using the e-commerce Shopify. If I go to this furniture brand, I can see all of the different products on this page. And a cheat for Shopify backends is that actually if you just attach .json to the URL, you can often get product information. So I'll attach .json there, and it tells me, and it used to be way more than this, so they must have cut down on this. It tells me all of the information about that page. So it says that it's got 38 products, and it used to show all those 38 products and the URLs for those products on here. But if we go back and we click on a specific product, and again, we put .json on the end of that product, what that's going to do is actually give us all of the information from this product page. So if you're able to combine what we said before about getting a sitemap with a Shopify store and these .json URLs, you can see how powerful this would be, because you'd be able to scrape or crawl the different URLs of a Shopify store and get the JSON information potentially really easily from those different URLs. Because if you just do a GET request on here, it's basically going to return JSON information. You can see we've got the price in here. We've even got the SKU. We've got where the inventory is managed. We've got the different options, like lots of different information. We've got the images and the URLs, the images. We've got even the alt tags for the images. So a lot of different information you can see for that product. You could see how powerful this would be. You found a Shopify store that you wanted to scrape the data of. However, larger stores like Gymshark, which is, I believe, still run on Shopify, will block this completely. So it will redirect you if you click on any of these. Let's go on men's stuff, and we try to do the same here, .json. It's just going to redirect us or tell us that the request has been blocked. So there are blocking measures against this, but a really cool trick for some Shopify sites. And that is everything. That is how you can scrape 90% of different websites. One thing we didn't discuss in much detail here is that when you are making requests for the internal APIs, you often get a full data set at once, which is beneficial because you don't have to make a huge number of requests and therefore risk getting blocked. But if a service sees too many requests coming from a specific user, say you were trying to scrape this every second of the day or every 60 seconds, it might detect that you are actually automating something and not a user. So you'd have to potentially connect to some service that rotates the proxy, i.e. emulates you being lots of different users in order to scrape it. But for small scraping operations, this will absolutely work. If you like the content, please give it a like below. It really helps me reach a wider audience. Thank you so much for watching.